Commander Ilara Vasilyev's coffee cup shattered against the floor of the International Space Defense Command Center, as every screen in the facility simultaneously flashed red. The Orbital Defense Network had just detected over 300 massive objects decelerating from near light speed on approach to Earth. Multiple bogies, sir. They're massive. Largest is approximately 12 kilometers in length. Lieutenant Orion Kasu called out, his fingers flying across the holographic interface. Configuration unknown. No match to any terrestrial design. Ilara's mind raced. Humanity had been scanning the stars for centuries, sending out signals, hoping for a response. Now, without warning or communication, an armada had arrived. Get me the Secretary General. Now. Her voice remained steady despite the chaos erupting around her. Within 30 minutes, the objects had settled into high Earth orbit, ignoring all attempts at communication. Then, without warning, smaller craft began descending toward major population centers. Across the planet, billions watched in stunned silence as the alien vessels broke through the clouds. In New York, Tokyo, Lagos, Rio de Janeiro, identical scenes played out as the visitors made their presence known. The first direct communication came 72 hours later. It wasn't directed at world leaders or military commanders, but broadcast simultaneously on all frequencies, in all languages. People of Earth, we are the Vixari Dominion. Your planet has been annexed as Resource Territory 4931B. Resistance will result in planetary sterilization. Cooperation will be rewarded with survival. You have 24 standard cycles to surrender all governmental authority. Richter Vex, High Commander of the Dominion Fleet, observed the small blue world from his command chamber. His species had conquered 17 solar systems through this exact protocol. Show overwhelming force, demand surrender, extract resources. The primitive inhabitants always complied. His aide, Sub-Commander Narat, appeared at his side. The humans are mobilizing defensive systems, Narat reported. Richter dismissed the concern with a flick of his secondary appendage. Standard response. They will capitulate, they always do. But on Earth, something unprecedented was happening. Emergency sessions of the United Nations had been called. Yet instead of discussing terms of surrender, representatives from nations that had been enemies for generations found themselves united by a threat greater than their differences. At ISDC headquarters, Commander Vasilyev stood before the hastily assembled Earth Defense Council, comprised of military leaders from 27 nations. The Vixari believe we will surrender because that's what every species they've encountered has done, she said, pointing to the intelligence gleaned from intercepted communications. They expect fear to paralyze us. But they've never met humans before. General Dio Okonkwo of the Pan-African Coalition nodded grimly. Then let's give them an introduction they won't forget. As the deadline approached, the Vixari prepared to receive Earth's surrender. Instead, they received something no previous civilization had ever offered: defiance. The Vixari ultimatum expired at precisely 800 UTC. High Commander Richter waited expectantly for the transmission containing Earth's surrender terms. When his communications officer finally announced an incoming message, Richter allowed himself a satisfied gesture with his primary tentacles. Display, he ordered. The holographic projection showed a single human female in a military uniform. Commander Ilara Vasilyev's face betrayed no fear as she delivered humanity's response. Vixari Dominion, we have received your demands. The nations of Earth have unanimously agreed on our answer. We decline your generous offer. Richter's chromatophores flashed crimson with rage. This is unprecedented. Prepare orbital bombardment protocols. On Earth, Operation Slingshot was already underway. While the Vixari had expected conventional military responses, they hadn't anticipated the ingenuity of human desperation. Every space agency and private aerospace company had repurposed their launch vehicles, converting satellites into kinetic projectiles. The first wave struck the Vixari fleet like a meteor shower, precise strikes, targeting propulsion systems rather than attempting to destroy the massive ships outright. Simultaneously, Hastily retrofitted nuclear submarines launched electromagnetic pulse weapons from beneath the oceans, temporarily disabling the smaller vessels in Earth's atmosphere. Status report, Richter demanded, as his flagship trembled from multiple impacts. Minor hull breaches on decks 7 through 12, reported Narat. Communication disrupted with dropships in sectors 3, 5, and 8. The humans they're using primitive technology in ways we didn't anticipate. Impossible, Richter roared. They're savages with barely functional space capability. On the ground, the resistance continued. In Bangalore, Dr. Indra Kapoor led a team that had reverse-engineered components from a downed Vexari shuttle, creating a virus that was steadily infiltrating their network. In Moscow, quantum physicist Dr. Nikolai Reznikov had discovered a vulnerability in the aliens' shield harmonics. Across the globe, humans were doing what they did best, adapting, improvising, and refusing to go quietly. The Vexari response was devastating. Orbital strikes obliterated military installations across 6 continents. Millions perished in the first wave. Yet for every base destroyed, underground facilities remained operational. For every city reduced to rubble, survivors emerged with new resolve. 2 weeks into the invasion, Sub-Commander Narat approached Richter with disturbing news. High Commander, we've lost contact with our ground forces in sectors 12 through 17. The humans have developed some kind of biological agent that targets our respiratory systems, and reports indicate they're adapting our own weapon, technologies for their use. Richter's outer membrane pulsated with anxiety. How is this possible? Our intelligence indicated a technological capability centuries behind our own. It appears, Narat replied carefully, that we severely underestimated their resourcefulness under pressure. In the ruins of former Paris, Ilara Vasiliev met with the remaining Earth Defense Council. Her uniform was torn and soot-stained, but her eyes burned with determination. Operation Phoenix is ready, she announced. We've consolidated our remaining nuclear arsenal. It won't destroy their fleet, but it will create the window we need for the real counterstrike. General Okonkwo looked at the other haggard faces around the table. Is Project Lazarus operational? Dr. Reznikov nodded. The quantum disruption field is ready, but we'll have only one chance. Ilara stood tall. Then we make it count. The Vexari never saw it coming. While their attention was focused on conventional military threats, humans had been waging a different kind of war. Dr. Indra Kapoor's virus had been silently spreading through the alien network for weeks, gathering intelligence and waiting for activation. Commence Operation Phoenix, Commander Vasiliev ordered from the underground bunker beneath the Urals. Simultaneously, every remaining nuclear missile on Earth launched toward the Vexari fleet. The aliens responded exactly as predicted, focusing their defense systems on the obvious threat while ignoring what came next. Project Lazarus activated. From 5 points around the globe, quantum disruption fields targeted the flagship's navigational systems. The virus awakened, scrambling communications between vessels, and then, most devastatingly, the nuclear detonations created an electromagnetic pulse unlike anything the Vexari had encountered before. On the flagship, chaos reigned. We've lost control of primary systems, Narat reported frantically. Navigation, weapons, life support, all compromised. Richter stared in disbelief as his magnificent fleet began to drift helplessly. How could primitives do this? It's not possible. The answer came when their screen suddenly displayed Commander Vasiliev's face again. High Commander Richter, she said calmly, you made a fundamental error. You judged our civilization by its age rather than its nature. Humans have spent our entire history fighting, against nature, against each other, against extinction itself. We've survived ice ages, plagues, world wars, and our own self-destructive tendencies. Did you really think we would simply surrender to an external threat? For the first time in the history of the Vexari Dominion, a conquest had failed. 3 days later, Richter authorized the unthinkable, a formal communication requesting cessation of hostilities. The meeting took place on neutral ground, a space station hastily assembled in orbit. Richter found himself face-to-face with Commander Vasiliev and representatives from Earth's nations. Your species is unlike any we've encountered, Richter admitted, his translator converting his vibrations into human speech. We believed overwhelming force was sufficient. That was your mistake, Alara replied. Humans don't calculate odds when our survival is threatened. We simply refuse to accept defeat. The ceasefire terms were unprecedented in Vexari history. Not only would they withdraw from Earth space, but they would provide technological knowledge as reparations for the damage caused. More significantly, they would return to the Dominion with news that the galaxy contained something they had never before encountered, a species that could not be conquered by force. As the Vexari ships prepared for departure, Dr. Kapoor approached Alara at the orbital observation deck. Do you think they'll honor the agreement? She asked. Alara watched the massive vessels receding into the darkness. They'll honor it because they know the alternative. We've shown them something they've never seen before. What's that? That sometimes, the most dangerous creature isn't the one with the biggest weapons. It's the one that refuses to submit no matter the cost. The Vexari defeat sent shockwaves across the galaxy. For 1,000 cycles, the Dominion had expanded unchallenged, and news of their retreat spread rapidly through subspace communications. On the Dominion homeworld of Vex Prime, the High Council convened an emergency session. This changes everything, declared Elder Zivix, her bioluminescent patterns flashing with agitation. If word spreads that we were repelled by a pre-FTL species, our authority over the tributary worlds will be questioned. Across the chamber, military strategist Morvath countered, then we must ensure this information never reaches our subjects. But it was already too late. 3 tributary species had intercepted the communications between Earth and the defeated fleet. The Nisari, enslaved for over 300 cycles, were the first to rise. Their crystalline cities, long dim under occupation, began to glow with renewed hope. Meanwhile, on Earth, recovery efforts coincided with technological leaps unprecedented in human history. The reparation data from the Vexari included partial schematics for faster-than-light travel, advanced medical technologies, and energy systems that promised to revolutionize life on the recovering planet. 6 months after the invasion, humanity launched its first FTL-capable vessel, the UES Defiance, with Commander Alara Vasiliev at the helm. Its mission wasn't exploration or conquest, but diplomatic outreach to the species mentioned in the Vexari databases. We're not alone in our struggle. Alara addressed her crew as they prepared for their maiden voyage. The galaxy is filled with worlds subjugated by the Dominion. We have an opportunity, perhaps even a responsibility, to share what we've learned. The Defiance made first contact with the Nisari rebellion 3 weeks later. The crystalline beings initially regarded the human vessel with suspicion. How do we know you aren't allied with our oppressors? Demanded rebellion leader Crixus, his faceted head refracting light in patterns expressing doubt. Alara activated a holographic display showing Earth's devastated cities. We've paid for our freedom with millions of lives and ruined continents. We're not here to conquer. We're here to offer partnership. The alliance that formed over the following months changed the balance of power in the sector. The Nisari contributed their knowledge of quantum crystallography, while humans provided strategic expertise and an unconquerable spirit that inspired other subjugated worlds. On Vex Prime, reports of spreading rebellion prompted desperate measures. Deploy the Eradicator fleet to the human system, ordered Elder Zivix. Their world must be reduced to ash as an example to others. The Eradicator fleet, comprising 30 planet-killer vessels, departed with a singular mission: ensure that humanity would never again threaten Vexari dominance. But intelligence traveled faster than even FTL ships. By the time the fleet arrived at the Sol system, they found not a vulnerable Earth, but a heavily fortified star system and a waiting coalition. Admiral Okonkwo, commanding the combined Earth-Nisari defense force from the flagship UES Indomitable, opened communications with the approaching armada. Vexari vessels, be advised, you are entering protected space. The people of Earth extend an invitation to discuss peaceful relations, or you may retreat to your territory. Those are your only options. The Vexari commander, unaccustomed to ultimatums, responded with contempt. We do not negotiate with lesser species. Prepare for extinction. What followed wasn't just a battle but a revelation. The combined tactics of human ingenuity and Nisari technology overwhelmed the supposedly invincible Eradicator fleet. Ships that had brought death to dozens of worlds found themselves outmaneuvered and outfought by a coalition that refused to submit to tyranny. As the last Vexari vessel retreated, a new era dawned, not just for Earth but for all species who had lived under the shadow of the Dominion. This isn't just our victory, Admiral Okonkwo transmitted across the coalition frequency. This is the beginning of something greater than any single world or species. This is the dawn of freedom in our corner of the galaxy. 5 years after the failed Vexari invasion, Earth had transformed. The scars of war remained visible, craters where cities once stood, vast memorials to the fallen. But alongside them rose structures of impossible geometry and function, products of the unprecedented technological exchange between former subject species. The newly christened Stellar Coalition headquarters in New Geneva hosted representatives from 23 species, all former victims or targets of Vexari expansion. At its center stood the Alliance Chamber, where the first formal treaty would be signed. We gather today not merely as survivors, began Secretary General Reiko Matsuda, her voice carrying across the assembled delegates, but as architects of a new galactic order based not on domination, but cooperation. The treaty established more than just mutual defense. It created frameworks for technological exchange, cultural preservation, and the rehabilitation of worlds devastated by Vexari strip mining. Most significantly, it codified a principle that had emerged from humanity's resistance: the sovereignty doctrine, declaring the right of all sentient species to self-determination. In orbit above, the coalition fleet conducted synchronized maneuvers, display of unity that would be broadcast across known space. The fleet's flagship, UES Phoenix, carried observers from non-aligned worlds, curious about this unprecedented alliance. Aboard the Phoenix, Admiral Ilara Vasiliev escorted Julak, an emissary from the notoriously isolationist Mirkari collective. Impressive, the avian diplomat conceded, neck feathers rippling in a gesture of grudging respect. But can such diverse species truly maintain cohesion when not faced with an immediate threat? Ilara smiled. That's the question the Vexari asked themselves before dismissing us as a serious threat. They couldn't conceive of cooperation without coercion. And yet, Julak countered, your species spent millennia fighting amongst yourselves before the invasion. True. But perhaps that was our greatest advantage. Ilara gestured toward the viewport where ships of various designs moved in perfect formation. We've had thousands of years to learn from our mistakes to understand the cost of division. When the Vexari arrived, they unknowingly provided what we'd always needed, a reason to unite. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, the Vexari Dominion faced an existential crisis. 24 previously submissive tributary worlds had declared independence. The once mighty empire had contracted to a fraction of its former territory. In the dimly lit chamber of the High Council on Vex Prime, Elder Zivix faced mounting criticism. Our economy is collapsing without the resource worlds, Councillor Morath stated flatly. The military cannot suppress rebellions on multiple fronts. We must consider the unthinkable: diplomatic engagement with the coalition. Negotiating with inferiors? Zivix's bioluminescence flared with indignation. We would lose all authority. Authority we no longer possess, interjected a new voice. Sub-Commander Narat, now elevated to the council after surviving the Earth debacle, stepped forward. I witnessed the humans firsthand. They did not defeat us through superior technology, but through adaptability and coordination. Perhaps it is time we learned from them rather than continuing to underestimate them. For the first time in recorded Vexari history, the High Council voted to send diplomatic representatives to another power. The delegation would travel to Earth, not as conquerors, but as supplicants seeking stability. When the Vexari diplomatic vessel entered Earth orbit under escort, it marked a turning point in galactic history. The species that had terrorized the quadrant for a millennium now sought terms. In the Alliance Chamber, the Vexari diplomats faced representatives of worlds they had once subjugated. The lead negotiator, Viscount Keldor, struggled to maintain composure under the collective gaze of former victims. The Dominion recognizes the changed circumstances of our galactic position. Keldor began stiffly. We seek mutually beneficial arrangements that will allow for peaceful coexistence. From across the chamber, Dr. Indra Kapoor, now Earth's chief scientific liaison, responded with measured words that belied the gravity of the moment. Peaceful coexistence is possible, she acknowledged, but it must be founded on something your species has never before accepted: equality. The terms before you require reparations to devastated worlds, the dismantling of your planet-killer weapons, and acceptance of the sovereignty doctrine. The negotiations lasted weeks, but the outcome was never truly in doubt. The Vexari, facing economic collapse and widespread rebellion, had no choice but to accept terms that would have been unimaginable before their encounter with humanity. As the treaty was finalized, Ilara found herself in a private conversation with Narat, the former subcommander who had advocated for diplomacy. Your species has rewritten the rules of the galaxy in less than a decade, Narat observed. How did we fail to see your potential? Ilara's response was simple but profound. Because you measured strength by technology and numbers alone. You never considered that true power might lie in something far less tangible, the will to endure, to adapt, and to stand together against impossible odds. 50 years after first contact, the galaxy had transformed beyond recognition. The former territories of the Vexari Dominion had evolved into a complex network of independent worlds and voluntary confederations. At the center of this new order stood the Stellar Coalition, now comprising over 60 distinct species united by common principles rather than force. The UES Horizon, the most advanced exploration vessel ever constructed, prepared for its maiden voyage from the orbital shipyards above Mars. Its mission to venture beyond known space, not for conquest or resource acquisition, but in the spirit of discovery that had driven humanity since its earliest days. Captain Maven Aradisi, granddaughter of a resistance fighter who had defended Damascus during the invasion, addressed her multinational and multi-species crew on the observation deck. Before them, Earth hung like a blue jewel against the darkness, its night side glittering, with lights that formed intricate patterns linking the rebuilt cities. 50 years ago our world faced extinction, Maven began, her voice carrying across the assembled crew. Today we embark not just as representatives of Earth, but as ambassadors of a new galactic paradigm. The horizon carries more than our hopes. It carries the legacy of everything we've learned since that fateful day. Among the crew stood Talax, a young Vexari xenoanthropologist, part of the first generation raised after the reforms. The Vexari integration into coalition society had been difficult, marked by justified suspicion and resentment. Yet here he stood, testament to the possibility of redemption. Captain, Talax approached after the briefing, his chromatophores shifting in patterns indicating respectful hesitation. I've studied the historical archives extensively, but I still struggle to understand something fundamental about your species. When faced with overwhelming technological superiority, how did humans find the courage to resist rather than submit? Maven considered the question carefully before responding. My grandmother used to say that humans have always been terrible at accepting limitations imposed by others. Throughout our history, we were told flight was impossible, that we could never reach the moon, that we couldn't cure certain diseases. Each time, someone refused to accept those limitations and proved them wrong. But the odds against you were objectively overwhelming, Talax persisted. True, but humans have never been particularly good at odds. Maven smiled. We don't calculate probabilities when our survival is at stake. We simply refuse to accept defeat as inevitable. As the horizon prepared for departure, ceremonies across Earth marked the anniversary of the invasion. Unlike the early commemorations, focused on mourning, These had evolved into celebrations of human resilience and interspecies cooperation. In New Geneva, at the Monument of First Contact, a massive sculpture created from the salvaged hull of a Vexari warship, Elder Ilara Vasiliev, now in her 80s, attended her final public ceremony before retirement. Beside her stood representatives of 24 species, including Richter's son, now the Vexari ambassador to Earth. Half a century ago, we faced annihilation. Ilara addressed the gathered crowd. We lost cities, nations, and millions of lives, but we gained something far more valuable: perspective. We discovered that our differences, which had divided us for millennia, were insignificant compared to what united us. Our shared humanity became our greatest strength. She gestured toward the stars becoming visible in the evening sky. The invasion changed everything, not because it nearly destroyed us, but because it revealed who we truly are. Not just to the Vexari, not just to the galaxy, but to ourselves. In deep space, the Horizon activated its enhanced FTL drive, preparing to venture further than any coalition vessel had gone before. Captain Aradisi gave the final command, her voice steady with purpose. "Helm, take us beyond the frontier." As the stars stretched into brilliant streaks of light, humanity's newest journey began. Not as conquerors or survivors, but as explorers carrying forward the hard-won wisdom of their species. That true strength lies not in domination, but in the unquenchable spirit that refuses to surrender to fear or tyranny. On countless worlds across the galaxy, species that had once lived in terror of Vexari ships appearing in their skies now looked to the stars with hope rather than dread. The coalition beacons pulsed across the void, carrying a simple message in thousands of languages: you are not alone, and you need never be subjugated again. The legacy of Earth's defiance had become more than a historical footnote. It had become the foundation of a new galactic order based on a principle that humans had always instinctively understood: that freedom is worth any price, and that together even the impossible can be overcome. In the vast library at Coalition headquarters, a simple plaque commemorated the turning point that had changed everything, inscribed with words attributed to Commander Ilara Vasiliev during the darkest days of the invasion. They came expecting submission. They found humanity instead.